How's it going, everyone? This is Yflex and welcome back to another A Producer's Approach video. In this video we're going to be looking at Noisestorm's song Renegade. So if you guys haven't watched my videos in the past, I basically break down these videos into three separate sections. I have an intro backstory section, then a breakdown analysis section, and then lastly after that I have an outro section. So this song Renegade by Noisestorm is a pretty long-standing song for me. At around the time of early 2012, not exactly on February 1st, 2012, but I'd say later that month to the beginning of March or even to the middle of March, one of my teammates when I was in high school on my track team showed me Monstercat, and my teammate was really into like metal music and rock music, which, you know, I was more into like hard rock at that time, so I was kind of perplexed why he liked electro music. And he told me about Monstercat, and when I looked up Monstercat on my own, this song was one of the first songs that I found, you know, through Monstercat. So there were other songs like Airwaves by Noisestorm, Game Changer by Day One, Disco Dancer by Matt Duke, Birthday Cake by Stephen Walking, Pump It by Resonate, and Lights by Resonate, if I remember all those songs correctly. I kind of revere those electro songs as kind of the starting 5 or 6 songs in terms of, you know, when I started listening to EDM in general. But Renegade is the song I like the most, and I can't remember exactly from that time period, but I would say that Renegade was my first Monstercat release I ever listened to. So there were a lot of various different songs, but most of the time I credit Renegade as the very first Monstercat release that I listened to, because this is the song I always listened to back in 2012 and the later part of 2012, early 2013. Like, I was always listening to Renegade. So for me, this was kind of the beginning of the whole Yflex EDM journey. But what's interesting about this song is that it's on the album 005 Evolution, I believe, and I don't know why that album exactly isn't on iTunes anymore. I was gonna try and look to see what other songs were on that album and maybe possibly buy the whole album off of iTunes or Apple Music, whatever it's called now. But for some reason, like, I couldn't really find the album, and I looked it up online, and on the Monstercat Reddit, it said that this album is not really on iTunes anymore, and I'm not even sure if you can buy the album on iTunes, which I find quite weird because I bought a few songs off of there, which were the more notable songs of when I started listening to EDM, like Day One's Game Changer, Noisestorm, Renegade, and Matt Duke's Disco Dancer. They're all on the same album, which is quite weird, with some other songs that I like as well, but it's just quite weird how that song's not on iTunes. So if anyone knows the reason of that, that would be nice to know why it's not on iTunes anymore. But anyways, Renegade's a really good song. It's pretty long. It's 6 minutes, as you can see, and this was the first time I ever really heard of Noisestorm's music. And after this, like, I looked up his kind of backlog discography, and at this time he had songs like Sub-Zero and songs like that, which were more kind of Moobaton, glitch hop. It was just starting to make electro, and, you know, this was the kind of predecessor way back in the day to what he would eventually make in the Breakdown, VIP, Crab Rave. Like, he's made so many notable songs from this, like, you know, time on Monstercat, but this is really like kind of his beginning. Like, he's one of the OGs because his song Airwaves is one of the first songs on Monstercat. But Renegade for me is definitely just kind of like one of those nostalgic songs, because it's really like the song I kind of categorize as the very first song I found when discovering Monstercat, which kind of took me on this whole kind of EDM journey. So it's just kind of nice to pay homage to this song on an album that's not on iTunes anymore. Strange. But anyways, this is Noisestorm's song Renegade, and we'll just start the breakdown. All right, so that was the intro, 30-second intro, which is more traditional with like a kick and a snare for electro and house songs within this time period. It's really interesting because this is one of the first songs where I heard vocal chops. Even though it is like a sample of some sort saying OMG, this was probably one of the first times I heard vocal chops in music at all, because at this time period I was listening to a lot of rock music, and rock music, they're singing the whole time and they didn't really implement a lot of the vocal chop techniques into that style of music. They might now, but back then it was more the traditional kind of a band playing with the singer and guitars playing, secondary guitar, bass guitar, and drums. So, I mean, you didn't really hear too much vocal chopping other than maybe Disturbed. They were probably the only ones with that wah kind of sound effect that you hear, and that's really notable from them. But this was really the first time I heard vocal chopping in an EDM song. So that's definitely really cool. The vocal chops to me are really nostalgic, hearing that OMG. I just know I'm listening to Renegade. And it's really cool how there's just like a pad starting in this intro section. It's not playing all the time, but it's kind of there every once in a while just to kind of give some background noise and some ambience just to start off the song. And then there is some kind of introduction of the bass line, or kind of bass wobble, almost, I guess I want to say, for that regard. So it's pretty interesting. It's a more traditional standard build up for a song of this time period. So there was like a white noise sweep, and then you get into this break section. So let's keep going. All right, so that was the kind of break and build up section. So the vocal chop you hear playing, and then it's slowly going through a filter. I almost think it's like a low pass filter, because then the low end kind of comes back, or it sounds like there's a little more like low end coming from it. I could be wrong there, but I know there is some type of filtering there. And then there's a pad that's playing along. It's starting to play the chord progression, but I kind of like how in this section the percussion just kind of totally comes out, and then you just focus on the vocal chop and that pad playing the chord progression, and then you kind of have like the percussion of the clap kind of starting, and then you kind of have a VFX coming in, and then it kind of builds up from there slowly, and then you kind of hear within the transition into the drop, you hear this kind of wobble sound, I almost want to say, which is really cool. There's just a lot going on kind of within this time of all the sounds that are playing. So I think the vocal chop kind of continues when the kind of wobble is playing, so it's not super noticeable, but if you listen close enough, like you can kind of hear that wobble sound. But because like the vocal chop's kind of playing, it kind of overshadows that sound a little bit. So anyways, really cool so far, and we'll get into this complextro drop. And if you didn't know kind of what the complextro style was, you'll get a really good representation with this song. All right, so that was the first part of the first drop. Really cool. You notice that it follows a kind of progression of a bass line, and there is kind of a lead thrown in there, but it's really kind of just a combination of all the sounds together following that kind of progression, which is really cool. A lot of the sounds are very 2012 esque. They're, I want to say, a lot of massive sounds. Within this time period, you know, Massive is a software synth that was very popular for sound design sounds, and you can really tell that's really on full display here. But this is kind of Complextro, the music that I kind of really got into. So basically, it's different sounds and different like sound design sounds following a progression, whether it be like a bass line progression. Sometimes it follows a chord progression, but for the most part, it follows like a bass line progression, and it can follow a chord progression because you will hear kind of the sounds and wobbles a little bit follow the chord progression in the more kind of melodic-ish drop in the second part of this first drop. But I like how in this section it follows that bass progression, and then at the end of the phrases you hear kind of like a more melodic lead kind of come in, and then you hear the vocal chops come in. And for the rhythm and the percussion, you kind of hear the kick and the snare. The snare almost is in the same timbre kind of frequency kind of sound range as almost sounding like a clap, but it is a snare. I think there is a hi-hat playing maybe just on every kick, but another technique some artists use is like they don't insert a hi-hat into the beginning or the first half of the first drop, or like that first maybe, I don't know, 6 or 7 measures, and then after that they introduce the hi-hat to introduce more flow and more variation. So I did notice like there was more hi-hat activity a little bit after the drop just started. Like I'd say like maybe halfway through like the first part of this drop, like halfway through of that measure, like then all of a sudden the hi-hat came in. But this drop in itself is really long, so I almost section it into like 3 different parts so far. Right now it's in 2, so there's that one really kind of progression where, you know, the kick and the snare playing, and then the hi-hat comes in, and then after that the progression changes. So there is a kind of change in the wobbles, and it's not the exact same the whole time, where the bass line changes, or you hear kind of more of the sound design sound, and then at the end of the phrases you hear this kind of like stubble sound, like da 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 da. Like, I don't know what exactly that sound is. It's really cool, a very Noisestorm unique sound design sound. There's a lot of reverb and delay on it, as I could tell. Like, it just kind of reverberates. It has some delay, like da-da-da-da, which is really cool. I like the variation, that part between the 2 sections, because, you know, with his sound design sounds, like, you could just, you know, play like the same thing over and over if you wanted to, because there's enough variation between the sounds to really have a lot of variation. But I like how he switched it a little bit, so it just makes it more interesting, has more variation. And with a lot of electro and complextro, the call and response aspect is huge. So like one sound plays in the bass line progression, and then another sound plays. So it's like one wub plays, another wub plays, one wub plays, another wub plays, and then that lead answers along with the vocal chops. So it's like a lot of call and response within a lot of complextro and electro within this time. And when I first started listening to this music, I didn't even realize that. I just liked all the different wubs playing at the same time, following a bass line, and then having different things answer at the end of the phrases. Like, to me, that was just interesting, how you could just combine all these different kind of random sounding sounds, which aren't really that random, but to me, I thought they were really random, into like a melodically, you know, feasible song, which I was just like, how do you do that? So yeah, it's just really cool. The rhythm doesn't really change after the hi-hats come in, to give it more variation, but just overall, like, I like that little variation between like the bass line change within like that very first drop part and then the second part of this first drop is really nice. And then here it kind of cuts out to give a little bit of a breath of air, and then has like the vocal sample, and then I think it's going to go into more of a melodic section. So let's keep going. Alright, so that part's really interesting. So it is kind of like the more melodic part. You don't hear as many wubs in the bass progression, in the bass line. It's really cool because then the vocal chops are really fully on display. And Noisestorm, I would say at this time period, was the only one that was really utilizing the vocal chop melodies like this. He did it in his first song, Airwaves, which I found after listening to Renegade. But this is a style and kind of what you hear a lot in more modern pop music, where they take vocals and then they take maybe one syllable and use that as the lead sound, or just the vocal chopping concept in general. It wasn't really huge until, like Skrillex did it in a lot of dubstep, but like at that point it wasn't really huge yet. Like that was kind of something Skrillex did. So for Noisestorm to kind of do it in this period was kind of like an influence of Skrillex, but he was giving his own spin, and it's just kind of like the precursor of what a lot of the vocal chops would eventually become in most music, which is what I like quite a bit. And I didn't realize till years later, until I started making music, that I realized I liked vocal chops quite a bit, and that's what they were called. I just thought they were samples just playing in the background back in the day in 2012, when I didn't know much about EDM or music production in general. So I was just like, oh, these kind of vocals and different pitches and stuff, they sound really cool. Like, that's really cool. So you notice that the vocal chops almost play their own lead, and then there is like an alternate lead and a different synth playing, which is kind of like a more distorted kind of synth. And then there are kind of paddish kind of lead synths playing in the ground. Not in the ground, but like in the background. You kind of hear it playing in the background a little bit. I almost want to call them cheesy synths, but they're not really cheesy, but they're just kind of, they have a lot of how do I say it, like a lot of timbre, to where they fill a lot of the space, and they sound kind of brassish almost like. So it's just kind of like what I kind of consider kind of older 80s sounds, I guess, almost like kind of brassish, kind of like cheesy-ish sounding sounds. I'm not exactly sure how to describe it, but it's really cool. Works really well in the song, and that's really cool. And then the lead kind of plays an alternate lead to the vocal chops, almost playing their own lead along with the bass line. And the percussion, I noticed there wasn't as much like hi-hats playing in this part, at least. Like, it's more focused like kick snare. I didn't really hear the hi-hat kind of playing as much as the beginning part of the drop in this section, so it's really interesting there. But after that, that more melodic section plays, and then it kind of the percussion stops, and then you kind of hear this part where the vocal chops are kind of playing, and then the bass line's kind of playing. So let's keep going. All right, so that part's interesting. I think in this song there are like 3 drops. So this is like a break section and like a build up in a sense, or it's just kind of like a break in between drops. But I'm gonna call it its own break section, because like all the percussion kind of cuts out and some of the sounds play. So there is like a pluck playing along with the sub bass, as you can see, because in these early Monstercat videos, a lot of the spectrum analyzer just picks up a lot of the sub sounds. I didn't know that for many years. I thought it was playing like the whole spectrum, but in the early days, like they only just focused mainly on like the sub sounds and or bass and sub sounds in the spectrum analyzer. So you see that the sub is kind of playing along, and it's really cool because it's like playing along with this kind of, it's playing along with the chord kind of progression, but it's also playing along with this plucked like sound, but it's like you feel like the weight of it because it's tied to that sub bass, which is really interesting. Like after the drop, that the sub bass didn't really cut out, but maybe because this is kind of like a midway in between like a drop, like he didn't want the sub to fully kind of phase out and then reintroduce it again. But it's pretty interesting there how that plays, and then you hear the vocal chops and you hear kind of that lead kind of come in with that kind of older sounding synth sound. Like it's a lot harder of a sound, like da, da, da. Yeah, so it's pretty interesting there, and then it's gonna kind of slowly kind of build back up into this drop again, which is interesting because there wasn't really any percussion really to go into it. It's just kind of going straight into it with like a VFX. So that's really unique in this time period, where there isn't really as much of a percussion buildup. So definitely an interesting touch and style. So let's keep going. All right, so that was kind of like I'll call it the second drop. It's really interesting. So it's kind of that same kind of melodic section, so to speak, but in this part, like I want to focus a little bit more on the bass line. So the bass line is like a really crunchy bass line. I really like it. And you do hear the side chain in this time period. So you kind of hear that pumping sound almost with the bass line, with that kind of, yeah, that bass line. You hear that pumping, like humma, humma, humma. Like you hear a little bit of that side chain pump, and that was like a stylistic choice of this time period. It's really exaggerated. Like sidechain is a technique used today to kind of bring down some of the sounds while you make like the percussion a little bit more apparent. But in this time period, they kind of exaggerated it to where you kind of hear this like pumping sound almost, like, which is really interesting. I actually personally really liked that pumping sound. I know a lot of people didn't really like it, going back to some of these songs. Like at the time period, the people listening to the music liked it. But, some of the people going back to some of these songs, like, oh, you notice the side chain, it's really pumping. And, a lot of producers now don't really want to have that exaggerated pumping because they know like it was kind of like a technique from this time period. So I can understand that. Like it makes your mix a little bit cleaner when you don't have the pumping sound. But I don't know, for me, like I was just a sucker for all those pumping bass lines back in the day. And when I still listen to this music, I still like hearing that like really pumping, exaggerated sidechain. So the bass line's really good. That sounds really good. Really nice kind of crunchy bass sound. And that sidechain really just exaggerates that bass line. So I really do like that. And then it outros kind of in the same way. The vocal chops don't kind of filter out or anything. They're kind of in the same volume range, just all the other sounds cut out. So it does a pretty good sense in keeping high frequency right after the drop with so much going on. So let's keep going. I just wanted to note in that section, there was this weird pad sound. I had to listen really closely. It went like, woo, like, I don't even know what that was, but that pad sound, I guess, is what was keeping kind of the difference between like the drop and this kind of break section, with the percussion cutting out and that bass line cutting out, to just kind of keep that same kind of frequency range to fill that space, so when the bass line, all those sounds cut out, it's not just like a really apparent like it sounds really weird. It's just like all of a sudden there's like a gap in some of the sounds. Like I kind of hear that kind of pad sound in the background. So that was pretty interesting how that pad was able to really hold a lot of like that kind of space for sound for this song. So it's pretty interesting, just from that transition. And then now is kind of the build up section. So let's keep going. All right, so that build up was pretty good. There's the clap that came in. There's these plucks that almost sound like organs, which is really strange. It's a little unique. I didn't notice that in the build up in the first drop, and they probably were there because the drop sounds pretty similar in terms of structure. So I just didn't notice that kind of pluckish organ type sound, which is pretty cool. And then it builds up in the same way, has the same type of transition. So I think the drop's going to be pretty similar in this drop, but if anything changes, I'll stop the video. If not, I'll let it pretty much play out into the outro, and then I'll just talk about the song when the song's finished. So if there's anything that changes, I'll stop the video. Alright, so that was Noisestorm's song Renegade, and we'll back up a little bit to the second drop and the outro. So the second drop is pretty much structured in the same way as the first drop. It just didn't have that additional kind of break section into that, I guess, second drop section, so we'll call this the third drop. This third drop section was pretty similar in terms of the structure. As I said, it didn't have that kind of build up into that melodic drop again. I figured that was an interesting part of the song, but there is a part where the hi-hats do come in that very first part of the third drop. Like not in the very beginning, but a little bit after that, the hi-hats come in to add a little bit extra flow and variation within the complextro section. And you do notice, or at least I did, for the second part of the third drop, like in the more melodic section, like the bass line's like really kind of heavily exaggerated with the side chain, which is pretty interesting. And then the lead comes in again towards that end of the drop. But what I found really interesting was in the outro. In the first part of the outro, there is like a side chain, almost pad sound that is similar to the pad sound you hear in the drop section. which is actually really cool. I never noticed that in the past, that there's actually like a sidechain kind of pad sound, or almost even that bass line sound, just kind of outroing and slowly fading out. And maybe the chord stack, or however the note position is not arranged within the higher notes, so it's like in the lower note range, so the timbre is a lot lower, which is really cool in that outro. I just never noticed that before, so that's like a really cool thing to catch. And it's kind of a nice sweep out with the kind of outro, and it's a more traditional 30-second outro with the kick, snare, and just kind of in the structure of the song itself. So overall, this is Noisestorm's song Renegade. This song's really good, and for the time period of 2012, it's actually a really good song. Actually, like, all the sounds are really good. It's really clean. Just some of the sounds are a little bit dated to 2012, which makes sense. I mean, at that time, that was kind of the more normal sound. So, you know, as producing over the years, you know, gets better and improves and sounds change, like some of the sounds sound a little dated to 2012 from this time period, but that's pretty normal. But just my overall takeaways from the song, I really like those transitionary kind of wobble sounds into the drop sections, or just kind of transitioning in general. That's pretty nice. The vocal chops really are what captures me in the song. They're the super nostalgic of the OMG vocals chops. Super nostalgic hearing that, like, when I hear this song. I really love the complextro drop. Just all the sound design sounds are just so unique and just so cool. They're really unique to Noisestorm. It just really showcases his style of music in almost any genre he can make. Just like really like heavier stuff like this, or the more melodic stuff, I guess, like Crab Rave in that sense. The bass line is really good. I really like that sidechain pump, even though not everyone likes the exaggerated sidechain pump. Like, I actually do like it within the song. It gives it nice flow within the song, just kind of that exaggeration of the bass line and stuff like that. And just overall, the song's really good. The structuring is a little bit common within this time period, where they kind of implement certain parts that are very similar in the same section. So like the kind of secondish build up to that secondish melodic drop again, which you kind of heard in the first drop. That part I'm not exactly sure about. That is a little repetitive to me, but overall, like, this song is really good. I come back to listen to the song every once in a while, just to kind of have the nostalgic feels. Personally, though, between this song and Airwaves, I kind of like Airwaves a little bit more, because I think in his first song Airwaves, there's a little bit more variation. Even though like the mix is not as good, there was like a little bit more variation in Airwaves than there was in Renegade. But for me, Renegade always just is one of those songs that just holds a special place when I think back to when I started listening to Monstercat and this whole kind of EDM journey. And this was pretty much the first song I listened to way back in 2012, which is just kind of crazy, because it's now like 10 years later where I'm listening to the song still, and, you know, still kind of in the EDM kind of world. And it's just kind of weird how at this time, like, I was not incorporated. I was just a fan, and now I'm kind of incorporated in this whole EDM world. So it's just kind of a weird kind of nostalgic kind of, you know, going down memory lane kind of song. So anyways, I hope you guys like this video. Sorry I talked so long in this video. This song just has a lot of sentimental value, at least to me, so I could talk for quite a while about this song. And sorry if there were some stutters in the song. I just couldn't think of certain words throughout the video, and my voice is a little nasally. I do have some allergies today, so you'll probably hear it for, you know, the next couple of videos in that sense, because around where I live there is still some pollen allergies, so definitely my apologies there. But hope you guys like the song. Definitely check out Noisestorm's other music. Definitely worth listening to. So anyways, I hope you guys like this video, and I'll see you guys in the next A Producers Approach video. All right, have a good one, everyone. Peace.